Hello everyone. Lovely to be with you.
Hello.
So my name is Richard Flack. I'm currently the Director of Policy and Strategy with the global clean energy think tank EMBA. But here it's my privilege to be sharing three people who've all got really interesting things to tell you about communicating, connecting in different parts of the world and using different approaches as well. Javon Sands, who's next to me, Natasha Cuvillier in the middle, and Patrick Cook at the far end. And I'm going to basically, in a moment, just ask each of them to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about what they've been doing and their experiences. But the bulk of the session, I'd love to have a conversation with you. Love to take your comments, your questions, your perspectives as well. And when we get to that, there'll be a microphone that will come around and, yeah. So without any further ado, Javon Sands, you're from the Bahamas. You're a youth climate ambassador and you're also a journalist. Tell us about what you do, both back at home in the Bahamas and what you've been doing here at COP.
Hello, okay, great, this is working. I am a climate change youth ambassador of the Bahamas, and that means that I'm here, a part of the Bahamas delegation. I underwent a lot of negotiations training over the past year to kind of be here and follow negotiations on behalf of my country. And in addition to that, I'm a journalist both back home and I'm doing journalism here. The interesting thing about that is that my climate justice journalism work actually started in a COP environment back in 2022. My first COP, COP27, I was in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt doing undergraduate research, and a component of that, an optional component, was to sort of engage in journalism through a program that an alumni of the course had set up and was inviting us to join. And so I took that leap and it just spiraled from there. I've been kind of writing on topics related to climate change since then. And what I try to do in my journalistic sort of space is to connect the realities of Bahamians on the ground to this crisis, because I think there's a lot of challenges with translating all of this like high-level information to the average Bahamian. And so that's kind of where I aim to innovate with my journalism. Yeah, and then in terms of the negotiations and being now here at COP29, there's a lot to think about, but not a lot to write about, because there hasn't been much going on. There's been a lot of like deadlocks. And so what I have been doing is sort of, again, translating this experience. My next story is going to be about youth perspectives from the region. It's kind of holding a conversation between young people from the Caribbean who are here at COP29 and those who aren't. So trying to pair those perspectives up and see what they're saying to each other.
And just on your audience, do you see your audience back home as being mainly young people, or are you aiming for all Bahamians?
So ideally, as a climate change youth ambassador, my audience is young people, but I think I engage them more through social media rather than through writing in like the newspaper. But I think that it is valuable to engage intergenerational audience, because that's also another way that you can kind of foster this information exchange to young people, because you have to think about who it is that is going to be talking to them, right? So it's like the person that is teaching them is informed about climate change, they're going to be able to get the message.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things that I've seen over the years is actually that feedback process where young people actually educate their parents and their grandparents about it. So maybe you're helping in that way as well. Natasha Cuvillier, you're from Argentina. You have an organization online called climaps.org. Tell us about it, why you set it up and what it aims to do.
Sure. So my name is Nashi. I am a co-founder of Sustainability Without Borders, and one of our initiatives is climaps.org. Maybe you can put the picture, I don't know if now or after. So this is my sixth COP. We started at COP21. That was when our organization was born, almost 10 years ago, which is quite of a road. I am an environmental scientist. My co-founder is a lawyer, and in the team we have a doctor, engineers, journalists, and a lot of volunteers, because we understand that climate needs to be broad and attained with a lot of multidisciplinary work. If not, we are going to have a narrow vision of what climate looks like or should be climate action, and that's why we're a broad team. My main focus on work at COP is to fundraise for our projects, to be honest. I go chasing people over there, trying to inspire them to take action and support our work. But in the framework of your question, climaps.org, we achieved to have 500 organizations in a map that is NGOs from Latin America. So the main point is to show that we are many. We are not only a few there, we are many. And there is a lot of people doing great things out there, and they need support and being on the spot. So that's the purpose of the map. And we also have a map for people, for startups, and for initiatives. But those 3 other maps are new, so we are still pushing them. But the map for NGOs is growing organically, because we do have a newsletter and communications only with opportunities. We do not spam, it's only opportunities, like for funding, for badge for the COP, or very useful resources. And that's the way we achieve to grow this community.
And when we were talking earlier outside, actually you were saying that initially you had to approach CSOs to get them to come, but now they come to you. So what is it that they gain, do you think, from being on your map?
So many people, when they see it, they say, oh, I didn't know there were so many NGOs in Latin America. That's the first reaction. And so they want to be part of the map, because we also show them in different, like here at COP, we show the map so people get to know your NGO, but also because we share opportunities. Again, sharing opportunities, young people are at need of finance, capacity building, resources. And also because young people right now face a world with less resources and more needs. So in that context, we try to show the organizations that are doing a good work to try to connect them and empower them.
Great, thank you. And Patrick Cook, you're from the UK, you're an energy analyst by day, but by night and by weekend, I guess. You've got a couple of interesting initiatives to tell us about, one global on climate change, Climate Talk, and also another one that was connected with the recent UK elections.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm here at COP29 with Climate Talk, which is an organisation that works to demystify climate policy for young people and to empower young people in the fight against the climate crisis. So we give young people the opportunity to write about climate policy on our website and for our social media, and to follow from home what's going on at COP and progress on climate negotiations and so on. And then earlier this year I worked on something called the Give an X campaign, which was a campaign run by an organisation called My Life, My Say, trying to get young people in the UK to register to vote before the general election this year. And we helped 488,000 young people to register to vote by using a campaign, kind of using 2 main strategies. The first was talking to young people where they are rather than lecturing them. So we all know as young people that it's very overwhelming sometimes, just constantly being bombarded with stuff telling you the climate crisis is a massive issue, this is also a big issue, you should care about this. It's really overwhelming and it's easy to switch off from that. So rather than doing that, we wanted to talk to young people about the issues that they already care about in their local communities, and then show them that those actually are already politics. They do actually already care about politics because they care about those issues. And the second part was using the language that young people themselves use when they talk about issues. And I'll give an example. So we ran some adverts with the wording, I give an X about, followed by an issue. So I might say, I give an X about the climate crisis. And we tried different words to see which were more effective. And in the UK, as you'll know, we have a big problem with housing costs and rental prices. So we ran an advert that said, I give an X about rental prices. And that was actually our worst performing ad. It's a little bit too technical, right? We ran another ad which said, I give an X about having to live with mum and dad for the rest of my life. And that was our second best performing ad of all of the adverts we ran. And if you think about it, that's the language that young people might use when they talk to each other about the issues that they care about. I think that whilst I care now about emissions and tenths of a degree and oil demand, why do I actually care about the climate crisis in the first place? It's because I care about butterflies in the garden and I care about the trees in the park. And I'm hopeful that in solving the climate crisis, we can also solve many other issues. I think that by relating the climate crisis to the connections that people have to the natural world, using language that's relatable and accessible, we will be far more effective in inspiring action.
So with that exercise, you're bringing people to the climate crisis via a number of different routes, but of course some of those other causes are worth caring about in their own right, aren't they? And just getting young people to actually get involved in politics and realise that it is for them because it affects them is worthwhile whether or not there was a climate crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. And the climate crisis, as we know, impacts so many different issues. It impacts people all around the world in many different ways, but also the solutions can help us to address all of those different issues as well.
So, Johan, I'm wondering, because you're primarily obviously working with a youth audience as well, does anything of what Patrick said resonate with you in terms of, you know, starting where people are?
Yeah, I'll definitely say the idea of like talking in the language that the youth use among themselves is really important. And so I think for sort of like our social media engagement, we try to do something a little similar, and then we also just try to do work on the ground. And so right now we have a schools program going on where we're going and giving presentations. We also have like videos and stuff that we are creating where it is like your climate change youth ambassador is speaking to you as primarily like a young person from the Bahamas, right? And so it's like trying to connect with them on their level, because that's the same level that you're at. You know, like no matter how many like stages you get on, you're still going to be a young person from the Bahamas for quite some time, and the other people who are experiencing these same issues with you, they can care about it as much as you do already if you just reach out to them in the way that you've been kind of brought into this space. Because I was brought into this space through growing up witnessing the challenges and then going off to college and connecting with a lot of young people from different places around the world who felt those same frustrations. And we had sort of like an informal community that led to us all moving into the climate justice space in our localities following our undergrad. And so I think that that is an important part of this work. And the more success we intend to have, the more likely it's going to be that we need to get better at just communicating between young people on like complex issues. So translating what it is that we have up here. And I think a lot of that work needs to start going on to the like for instance, the negotiators. So like I have the unique perspective of being in the negotiating rooms. And a lot of what they talk about is stuff like language, about wording, how do we communicate this? And like that's basically like the brunt of what's going on in these rooms, right? Like how do we say what it is that we're trying to say? A lot of times there's agreement and you're really close, but then like there's like someone who has a problem with one word and then everything just falls apart. They forget that they were like just about to agree to this thing. Now everyone's like sticking to their positions again. So that communication, effective communication, sort of the topic of what we're here talking about, is crucially important, and a big component of that is speaking to people in their own language, right?
Yeah, that reminds me actually of the end of the Paris Climate Summit when the whole thing nearly fell down on the difference between the word should and shall, because in legalese that means completely different things. And I was looking at your website, Patrick, Climate Talk, and one of the things that I was quite intrigued by was how effectively you've been able to take these very abstract concepts and distill them down into, you know, a fairly short document that actually anyone can understand. I mean, it strikes me that that's a useful service not only to young people but to actually all people, basically.
Yeah, definitely. And these negotiations are pretty inaccessible to everyone, right? This technical legal language is really hard to understand. I still don't understand it myself. So yeah, I think breaking it down is really important and giving people an insight into what's happening on the ground. So we also run interviews where we interview young people, young activists about their work and find that's really effective.
I'm curious about how you promote the site? How you go about letting people know that it's there?
So we have a big social media following, I'd say is the biggest one. So LinkedIn and Instagram, Climate Talk. I was actually in a negotiation yesterday and I saw someone in front of me. They were obviously a bit bored by the legal language in front of them. So they were scrolling through their LinkedIn. I saw them come across one of our interviews and watch it.
That is fantastic, yeah. I'm staying in the same hotel with a group of people from WWF, and one of them is doing some writing for a children's newspaper back in the UK, a weekly children's newspaper, and he managed to do 400 words on climate finance for children under 10. I thought that was fantastic. Actually, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is you're obviously working across a region, and the region includes not only Latin America but Caribbean as well. And it's interesting among CSOs how that entire region is being seen as one thing. So is part of what you're doing actually creating a community across this entire region in a multiplicity of languages?
Yes, so one of the things is that we have a lot of differences. Some people are on the beach and they have sunny days. Some people are in the south and it's very snowy and you are in the mountains. Some people are even in like a desert because Latin America is very broad and we have almost all ecosystems inside, but the problems are the same. They are all being affected by climate change. They are all being affected by biodiversity loss and pollution, as many others, environmental crises. So the first call that we were all in was from protest to proposal. To go from protest, hey, this is not good, you should not be doing this, to this is what you should be doing, this is our proposal. And then from proposal to implementation. So in the Regional Conference of Youth between 2022 and 2023, we got a document with all the best practices implemented by different countries in Latin America. Because we have a reality that is different from UK. I mean, if you have a good policy in UK, it might be very difficult to implement in Buenos Aires because the resources are not the same, the culture is not the same. But I might be copying some policies from Chile or from Uruguay or from countries that are more similar in a way. So we shared those among young people and we got the campaign in Change.org with 50,000 signatures and we presented at COP in Sharm el-Sheikh. And that was something that brought people together, from protest to proposal to implementation.
And have you found that some of the NGOs in your network in different countries are actually finding interesting projects to work on together?
Yes, totally. Actually, ourselves, we made a coalition of 7 sister organizations because a lot of people want to have scale impact. And I am not going to go into Chile and start a new NGO. We made a partnership between 7 sister organizations from Chile, from Colombia, from Honduras, from Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina, and another one from Argentina. So that is the kind of work, and we have experience sharing funds. That's kind of the, how do you say, red line to see if you can be friends as an NGO, sharing funds and implementing together projects. So I feel like there are a lot of opportunities for collaboration inside the region.
I'm interested in this from a perspective of an audience as well. I used to work for the BBC World Service radio back in the day, and I can remember once being in a taxi in Liberia and the taxi driver had on one of the BBC World Service phone-in programs. And what was really interesting is that you got people phoning in from different parts of Africa talking about the situation in another part of Africa. It was like that created an Africa-wide conversation almost between different countries and different people. Now, Javon, the Caribbean's a lot smaller than Africa, but you do have a multiplicity of countries, and I'm wondering whether the work that you do actually has this influence outside the Bahamas, whether it is creating this kind of network, this conversation across the Caribbean.
Well, I've been really fortunate to be heavily involved with a lot of like Caribbean-wide initiatives and programs and academies and communities throughout this year. And right now I'm actually on a COP29 fellowship for journalism with Climate Tracker Caribbean. So even just in the work of telling the stories here, those perspectives are coming from all over the region and going back to the entire region. So I do think we have more and more programs popping up that kind of take the work that everyone's doing in their own locality and spread those insights and those key messages around and influence sort of the decision making happening on the ground in sort of like local communities and local organizations. One of the things that's really interesting is that young people are kind of spearheading this thing where there's a lot of group chats, right? There's a lot of group chats because everyone wants to be connected, right? Yeah. And like the more we, connect with one person on LinkedIn, they're sending you someone else, and like you need to talk to this person, you need to get into this group chat, you need to get on this message board, and so there is a lot of connectivity happening, and we are starting to see how that connectivity is influencing action on the ground.
That's very interesting. And another thing I was curious about with your own work is what sort of issues, what sort of stories you find get the most engagement. Is it climate impacts? Is it fairness and justice? Or are people more interested in getting involved in solutions?
I think it's a mix, but I will say one of my stories that I had a lot of people who knew me like growing up and things reach out to me after I wrote was a story about how consumerism is a huge part of the climate crisis. And it's probably because we're an island nation, and so we depend heavily on importing goods, and so we are trending towards sort of like over consuming, and how it's kind of this conversation of where while we may not be like responsible for the climate crisis, we do have a responsibility to not add to what the crisis is today by moving closer to the countries, the companies that are responsible for the crisis. Instead, we should be moving away. And people don't like to have that conversation, right? Because it's like, the idea of equity in that conversation is very tricky, because you can't tell me that I can't do this when you did this and it's affecting me. And I think that goes up to the higher level, because that's the conversation that world leaders are having at the same time. It's like, you can't tell me that I can't rely on fossil fuels when you've been relying on them and you've developed. And so kind of seeing that duality is really interesting. And I think those sort of stories that relate both the higher level stuff to what people are experiencing just between themselves is where I get sort of the most impact. And then there's also stories about like the literal impact. So when you talk about climate change and heat, everyone is interested, right? It's like everyone's outside, everyone's hot, everyone wants to go to the beach, but somehow the beach is not becoming a place of relaxation and enjoyment anymore. And so that also gets a lot of impact on the ground, and especially among young people, because like they're closer to their childhood experience of the beach was that place to be as an islander, right? Yeah, it's the place that's associated with fun and joy, isn't it, and so on and so forth. Talking of business, actually, I was quite interested that you mentioned you also have this map of businesses across Latin America. So how do you, what sort of businesses, how do you choose them, or how do they choose themselves? How do you vet them to make sure that they are actually part of the solution, not part of the problem?
Yeah, sure. So the map we have right now is startups, and we're talking with Climate Kick, which is an organization from the European side of startups, because they are interested in having a live database. Sometimes you have a lot of database about to share opportunities or to engage people, but those databases are not updated. So they were interested in sharing with us opportunities to see if we can come and bring together all the climate tech startups in Latin America. And the other thing is that we want to make a map of big businesses because we want to share their climate ambition and try to have a little bit of peer pressure, between companies in the region to show how good some companies are performing and trying to inspire others to perform better.
Yeah, it's interesting. In some of my recent work, not current work, but recent work, I was involved in developing something called the Net Zero Tracker, which tracks the net zero commitments of countries, states and regions, cities and businesses worldwide. And that's the language that we adopted. It was a race, make it into a competition. We even used some sort of Olympics type language in some places, because that's exactly what you want to have, isn't it?
But I would like to add some more thing, is that right now the world is being very polarized in terms of politics, I am experiencing myself as an Argentinian, a very hard environment to use the words climate change, to be polite. So we are making it a health issue. Right. Climate is also a health issue because the heat waves affects especially the children and the most vulnerable people. And because the big storms are affecting households, and we have dengue, the mosquito. We don't have malaria, but we have dengue, which is another very beautiful illness coming from mosquitoes. And so we're making it a health issue and also a household issue, but not with the words of household, of course, right? So I think that we need to be very smart on how we present climate action as a thing that can appeal no matter who you voted. This is something that you should be concerned, and you can do something about it.
Yeah, exactly. My experience working in the UK, where I worked on this issue for about 8 years, was that when it was depolarized, life was so much easier.
Totally.
Because you can get political action in place that actually survives elections.
Totally.
Whereas when it's so polarized, I guess in Argentina it's a particular issue. One government may be constructive, the next will rip it all down, and we've seen this in the States as well. You don't get progress that way, do you? I'd love to hear your comments, your questions, your perspectives now. So I'm not sure if we've got another handheld mic. Just looking at the technician. Do we have another mic? Or if not, I can take this one around. Yeah?
No, only the ones that you...
Okay, so I will come round with whoever's got a comment or a question. So, yeah, please do. That's right. Please do.
Thank you, William.
Oh, in that case, my lapel mic is
never
working.
mind. Actually,
It's okay.
you hear me.
Yes, I hear you very well.
So, thank you very much. It was amazing to hear all of you. And there's one question. Amazing. You explained us how to speak to the young generation and how to attract, how to make them hear. But it's not young generation who support our parents. And the climate is changed because of the Y and the X generation. And what you young, amazing people, how you suggest us to speak to this generation so they will be aware and stop these things?
It's a really great question, Patrick.
Well, I would just say that people of all ages are affected by the climate crisis, and whilst the people in power might be older, that actually unfortunately doesn't mean that older people are represented by the politicians usually, and many of them are being ignored actually, and they deserve climate action as well for their own livelihoods and their families and their communities. So I think whilst getting the energy and enthusiasm from young people is so important, you're right that we also need to bring people of all ages along, and it's about intergenerational fairness, but it should be about people of all ages working together to find the solutions, absolutely.
There have been some good examples of this, haven't there? There was a case in Switzerland, I think, a court case, where a group of grandmothers and grandfathers brought legal action against the Swiss government. I think they won too. If my memory may be slightly at fault because I'm quite old myself, but I think that might be right, yeah.
I can corroborate
please,
that. But I will add to what you were saying, Patrick, that I think we've talked a lot about translating and communicating these higher level conversations to like the average person, but I think we need to think about this dialogue between communities and governments or policymakers, because there's also a disconnect going the other way. I think you'll find that even if they may not understand the technical language very well, the people on the ground understand that there's a problem, and they have solutions, they have ideas, but those aren't being communicated back up the chain. And so you'll hear in these conversations here at COPS a lot about a top-down approach versus a bottom-up approach, but neither one works in isolation. I think that there needs to be a dialogue that brings those two things together and has a whole new third thing. I think we've gotten, like, the polarization is a part of the problem. Like, we've gotten really into the weeds on this or that when we're kind of blinding ourselves to the obvious solutions outside of this realm of like here, there. So I do think there is validity in like bringing in like an intergenerational perspective, and I love the point about like politicians don't represent their entire generation, because I talked about this on another panel, but the youth have not just started being failed. The youth of the past were also failed by their leaders, and that's why we're in the problem that we're in now. And so, it does require intergenerational equity to bring us to a solution that's effective for everyone.
Yeah, thanks for a great question. It's really good. Who else? Yep, okay. I think this microphone is working now, so there you go.
Do you see yourselves ever considering being elected officials or politicians? Do you think there's value in activists and youth like yourselves becoming politicians?
Great question.
Yes.
In my case, I had the opportunity to be in the government, but I am building an NGO that has, how do you say, like an image, And if you mix politics, like if myself, I go to the government and then I cannot come back to the NGO. And the NGO for me gives me a freedom to speak, to see, to go into COPs and to represent my own beliefs, that the government is not for me, I will say. But we do encourage some young people that are from another sparkling movement to be the next politicians, because we need to train young people and give them the tools to become good leaders. So we are helping them, but us as an NGO, we love to be an NGO and we are not moving from there.
What do you think, Javon? Are you a future Prime Minister?
So I get that a lot, but so I'm kind of in this like go-between for like activists, NGO side of things, and the government right now as like a climate change youth ambassador. And I agree with like, upholding the image and things like that of being outside of the government, and especially the freedom. Because I think what happens is when youth activists or just activists are being encouraged to kind of take their energy and their ideas into the political sphere, they end up coming up against this thing called protocol, this thing called like, I don't know, just like the traditional way that sphere, that space works. And it just it's not very welcoming to an energetic activist type of person. And you end up like struggling in your identity in order to try to see how do you sort of funnel this energy down into a way that it can move through the cracks in this system to actually be effective. And I think that's why so many activists and stuff stay out, or if they go in, you'll see like radical change in who they are and what they represent, because the system is kind of designed to do that. And I don't know, I think what would have to happen is systems change, but it has to be done through sort of this collective action where we all go at it at once. Like we can't just let ourselves be like lined up and then like one by one we go in and they're going through like a factory line and coming out a totally new product. So I think there is something to be said about that in terms of like how it changes.
Evolution.
Yeah.
And also, if you go into politics, the issue that you care about, you might spend 1% of your time dealing with that, right? You have to deal with all kinds of other things as well. Right, who else has got a question or a comment? Let me bring the microphone over to you at the back.
Dear panelists, thank you so much for such an impactful conversation. My question is that I want to ask whether the climate topic could be included in the school programs so we can engage the children, the future generation. So it could be included not in a way to irritate them, to make them run away from this topic, but rather engaging them in it. For example, we can invite some corporate representatives to a little training so the children could get the insights from the real experience. For example, when it comes to the corporate sector, I'm personally working in a banking sphere. I think if each of the corporation will create a strategy, for example, the corporate social responsibility strategy, which encompasses the decision makers among the employees who will also participate in decision-making process, we can actually achieve the action as a final result. Why? Because if we will engage them, we will, make those meetings happen, and afterwards we will make them participate in those activities. For example, we will engage them in beach cleansing, or plants, crops planting, and etc. And when people are engaging in those activities, I think they get more inspired by what they are actually doing. They see the impact they're actually bringing to the community. For example, they can also go to the orphanages. I personally organized some of those events, and I saw how people are happy after those events. They are so engaged in it, and then they actually click and understand how important it is to make the world a better place. So I think that if each organization will consider it, will actually make a huge action.
Great, thanks very much. Two excellent points. In some countries, climate change is already part of the curriculum. Patrick, I think you're probably young enough that it's been part of the curriculum that you would have had at school in the UK?
Yeah, I actually remember doing a project about climate change and global warming, as we were calling it at the time, and about recycling. And actually that is the reason I would say quite confidently that I'm here today, because I was so inspired by doing that project when I was 8 years old that for the rest of my life I always felt that I wanted to have an impact on the environment. I also think there's something about being honest really with young people. They're going to grow up in this world, and we do have a duty of honesty to tell them about the problems that are going to face their generation. And it's not just about scaring them, but just not make sure that they don't turn around in 10 or 20 years and say, hey guys, you never told us that we were going to inherit all of this.
But yeah, your last point I think is really important though, isn't it? Because there is this rise in climate anxiety,
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
climate anxiety is not really doing anyone any good. So I think the last part of what you said is really key, as why personally I'm very interested in engaging people with solutions rather than the scale of the problem
Can
as
I-
well. Have either of you got perspectives on either the education bit or the second part, which was about engaging people from banks and big business?
Yes, I wanted to add that in our case, we are creating a community center for regeneration, and we want kids to camp in our land, but just having fun in nature and falling in love with the birds, the flowers, the butterflies, watching a sunset, watching the stars and connecting with nature, and then explaining, nature, we are doing this and this is not good, but this is all of the things we should be doing, and actually spend more time doing something like with your hands, like growing a vegetable garden, or just taking care of trees, or trying to have bird watching, and in that intersectionality, you can understand what is happening in the world, and for kids, for us, it's easier to have a good mood after and ease eco-anxiety.
Sure.
Yeah, so you both touched on two really important things that I wanted to share, but also I'll start by saying that the education, like integration of that into the curriculum, and maybe not so much into the curriculum, because I think depending on sort of the culture you have in the education system, it's a lot harder to get students to care about something when it's embedded into their curriculum. So what we are doing is we are curating presentations for different grade levels, age groups, and we're going into the schools and we're kind of being like that fun guest speaker that you look forward to on a Friday, and we're telling them about climate change, we're telling them about climate action. And as we move forward in this program, as an aside to this, we also have a growing list of sustainable businesses that we're kind of like building relationships with, so that we can kind of merge these two programs, whereas we have educational opportunities and like internships, career opportunities, all linked up in this program that may become sort of like an extracurriculum type of activity. But for now, we're engaging them. We're trying to reach all of the schools across our archipelago, which is a challenge. It's a challenge in that we are an archipelago and you have to cross land and sea to get to students further and further away from the capital, and you need funds to do that. And so again, pairing up with businesses and trying to like connect with them or have this be their sustainability initiative, so like, you fund us to be able to present this to students, like you comp us a plane ticket or comp us a ferry ride or something like that, and you'll be a part of our list. We'll have some sort of engagement in that area. I think it's the sort of innovative approach we're taking to that from like both the business side of things and also getting it into the education. But I did want to touch on this idea of truth for young people, because there's different types of fear that we inspire in children, right? Oftentimes we inspire fear in them when we lie to them about like these fantastical things like the boogeyman or something like that. And then we also inspire fear in them. We can inspire fear in them when they discover that we've been lying to them about something like climate change, right? When they come into that truth that, Mom, Dad, things are burning, like this hurricane, people lost their homes. Like I've witnessed young people in the Bahamas like experience a hurricane and be like, what's going on? Learn about things like climate change and then be inspired to act at 8 years old, right? I've witnessed this happen time and time again. So I think the more honest we are in that conversation, the more likely we are to have action taking place among our youth who shouldn't have to bear this burden, but they do when they realize that people are at risk because they're a person, their family is made up of people, and they want to protect people. So I do think there is value in that. And I was coming to the second thing. It's like lost my train of thought. Maybe it'll come back.
Thank you.
Time is against us, I'm afraid. I was hoping we'd have time for one or more questions, but yeah, 5 minutes left. Okay, fantastic. In that case, I think there was another hand up over here, so let's do that. Brilliant, thank you.
So I have a couple, I'm going to try to find my way to this question. You lifted up the idea of having a message that can cut through to young people in this kind of moment, and I love that example, living with mom and dad. How do you encourage young people to, after hearing that message, continue that work of finding more information? I find a lot of young people will get this message on social media, and especially in a time of polarization, there's so much misinformation where someone can just lie about anything and just that'll be the fact. How do you get them to go that step beyond to encourage them to actually find out what the things are that are going to affect them beyond that?
Well, I would say that if you start with the emotional story, then it's going to be far more resilient to misinformation, and people will then go and do the research about the facts and find out the truth for themselves. Whereas if you start with, hey guys, temperatures are rising and they're going to hit 2 degrees, well then someone else can come along with a social media post and say, oh no, it's fine if temperatures hit 2 degrees, that's not a problem. And then suddenly those cancel out and you might think that there's not an issue. Whereas if you can start with the emotional story of something's not right here, we need to take action, then the facts can be discovered if you're actually if you're going out to look for them.
But isn't there a slight danger there in the sense that some of the polarisation that we've seen, some of the far right feelings are also based on emotion? It's just a very different emotion.
That's true, and it's more of an emotion of fear and anger, which is more likely to thrive when people are pissed off. So that is a real threat, and I think one thing that's really important is making sure that our solutions to climate change are fair, and so people aren't feeling like they're being punished for something that they didn't do. We have to be fair, we have to bring people along with us, and we have to take the opportunity to also address other issues that people are angry about already.
Yeah, and I think fairness is a really interesting concept, because even young kids tend to have a very, very good sense of fairness. Even when they're like 5 years old, they know what's fair and what's unfair. Just in the couple of minutes that we have left, and that is all, I'd just like to ask you all one quick question, which is that if you were to try and distill down what the essence, the really core of what you think makes good communication on climate change for young people? You know, it could be the message you put over, or the way you put it over, or something like that. How would you encapsulate it? How would you describe it in, like, you know, sort of 15 or 20 seconds? Who'd like to start with that, Javon?
2 minutes, okay. I'll be quick. I think when I've gotten different versions of this question, my response is really centered around the idea of communicating community, because if we can communicate to young people, and I think people are in this day and age kind of starved for community, in the sense that we're being pulled away from our communities by so many different things, and climate change being one of them. And so I think if you can communicate this idea that the approach, the solution, what we can do about this big problem is just to talk to a friend, to get together with a group of friends on a Saturday and hit a beach and appreciate that.
Let me stop you there, because I'm getting the 1 minute warning. Nasha?
Sure. So I think that a good campaign should have like the feelings first, like this is the problem, and maybe you feel a little bit of fear or shock or surprise or whatever, but very quickly invite them, not to war, not to revolution, not to destroy things, but actually to build a better world, to inspire them to be part of the evolution that we need as human beings to go to something beautiful, clean, happy, appealing, etc.
Thanks very much, Patrick.
I'd agree that we need to invite people to be part of a movement and say, hey, look, other people are doing this, come and join us and be a part of this.
Fantastic. Let me ask you now just to put your hands together finally, if you would, for our three fantastic panellists. Patrick Cook, Nasha Chevalier, Javon Sands. Thank you.